folks, let's do this. Welcome to Dangerous Ideas. I'm Lee Camp. The big Tucker Carlson Vladimir Putin interview dropped. It dropped, man, and it is huge. No, I'm playing it up a little bit, but just the dynamics of this, the idea that we are such a juvenile, pathetic, barbarian nation here in the United States. The idea that the only interviewer that will give you a actual few minutes to hear what it is that Putin has to say is this kind of bizarre multi-millionaire rich kid who has failed upwards his entire life and promotes xenophobia and at times racism. And he is the only guy that you can actually get, not even just do an interview, just speak. He's the only one to even speak to the president of Russia. It's just, how did we end up here? But I largely thought it was a fine interview. I have some criticism of Tucker Carlson I'm going to get into, but because he is kind of promoting, Tucker Carlson promotes war, just not war with Russia. He's promoting kind of war with China. That's more his thing. I'll play a few clips backing up that case, but that's not the larger point here. The larger point is, there was a lot of interesting things said. I watched most of the interview. Haven't watched all of it yet. It is 2 hours long. And there's some various interesting things said, which I'm going to play you some clips of, but I'm also in this hour going to get into some updates in Israel's special genocide operation. It's going great. It's going great. The special genocide Israel's perpetrating on the Palestinian people. I'm going to give you some updates on that. Also going to get into the role of think tanks in perpetrating and pushing our endless wars, how it is that think tanks have become so pivotal in making sure the United States is always at war, is always bombing innocent people around the globe, supporting genocide, such as the one Israel is perpetrating right now. I'm going to get into that. And we're also going to be joined later by activist Wayne Hsiung, who is the co-founder of Direct Action Everywhere. He had recently just got out of prison. I'm not quite sure how long he was there, many months, if not a year, but at least many months. And I'm going to be talking to him about his time in prison, the persecution and the attacks he's been under, simply for freeing tortured animals. That is all he did. And our government and the state government of California have gone after him in all ways. Anyway, we're going to be getting into all that. Please click thumbs up, click share. I am one of the most suppressed and censored comedian commentators in the nation, and it is really thanks to you guys that I even can continue to have a show. But speaking of censorship, here is Tucker Carlson. You can't even get an interview with Putin on a mainstream television, on at least not one that he's willing to do. He knows he could go on CNN and be heavily edited, and they'd show 30-second sound bites to help the American people despise everything about Russia. But in terms of an actual hearing of what he has to say, he knows he has to go to these alternate outlets. And so here he is talking with Tucker Carlson. He starts off the interview with a half-hour, I kid you not, half-hour history of Ukraine. Now, some of it I certainly did not know, such as the stuff that went on hundreds and hundreds of years ago. But most of it you and I believe, know. However, it is news to the American people. And I'm talking the recent history of Ukraine, the Maidan coup that the U.S. perpetrated in Ukraine in 2014 with Victoria Nuland's help. Some say genocide. In fact, that case is also in front of the ICJ, and they have chosen not to throw out yet that case, saying that Ukraine was perpetrating genocide in the Donbass region against culturally Russian people, killing 15,000 over several years. That was before Russia invaded Ukraine. And, so Putin gives some of this history, which those of us who, are on independent media have been talking about this, have been calling this a proxy war, which it is, etc. We've known this history for a long time. So it's it's not news in that regard. But the thing is, most Americans are not seeing this stuff. They're not seeing the reality. They're not seeing what's actually going on in these countries, or even hearing about it on your mainstream media. And they're not supposed to, right? In order to manufacture consent for war, you need people ignorant. You need them to not understand the reality of these situations. People don't just line up to, help kill hundreds of thousands in Ukraine without being effectively propagandized. And that is what has been successful. And that's why people, by people, I mean mainstream media largely, along with the U.S. government, have flipped the F out about Tucker Carlson speaking to Vladimir Putin. Anyway, I want to, Ben Norton did Carlson's getting a lot of praise for this. In certain regards, he should. He let Putin explain his side of things. And there's some praise to be given there. But a lot of people are acting like Tucker Carlson has no history of, like he's just fully anti-war and he's just wants peace around the world. But as Ben Norton talks about in these tweets, Tucker Carlson has a long history of pushing kind of war with China, of pushing xenophobia, of trying to
if Russia
for war with China. And I'm going to play some of those clips in a moment. But here he is trying to get Putin to agree with him that China is the real enemy and that China, is going to run roughshod over these other countries. And you'll see, I'll probably play most of these 2 minutes. You'll see what Putin's response is, although I'll probably play it a little faster speed than 1-to-1,
Question is what comes next. And maybe you trade one colonial power for another much less sentimental and forgiving colonial power. I mean,
I just want to say that right there, he calls China a colonial power when in fact China is not colonizing other countries, at least not recently. And so to act like China is doing the exact same thing as the United States is just, it's either ignorant or it's trying to manufacture consent for war with China. China does not have 800, 900 military bases around the world. China is not bombing in other countries. China is not tearing up other societies the way the U.S. does and is doing on a daily basis. So to just be like, the U.S. is a colonial power and China is a colonial power is at minimum willfully ignorant. Of course, Tucker Carlson has mastered the look of kind of willful ignorance, right? I'll probably point it out again, but throughout all his interviews, Tucker Carlson just kind of looks like, well, I don't understand what's happening, but why? And I know he's smarter than that. He does know these answers. He does know what's happening, but he likes to play this like, eh. And I also saw an interview with him it was several months ago. It probably was filmed several months before that, talking about how it only occurred to him, like he used to be on CNN for years and years, right? It only occurred to him in the past few years that, oh my God, our media, the US media, is part of the problem. And they actually are propagandizing to the people. And he just realized that a couple of years ago. And he was inside of it. Like he spent, 10 years at CNN or something? So either he's the dumbest human being to ever live, being inside of CNN for 10 years and not realizing it's propaganda, or he thinks that that's a better, kind of persona to have, as the guy who just figured out what corporate media is. Anyway, signed up.
The BRICS, for example, in danger of being completely dominated by the Chinese economy in a way that's not good for their sovereignty.
Most of you know what BRICS is, right? It's the alternative to kind of the World Bank system. It's going outside the petrodollar, and the biggest countries involved in it are China and Russia and Brazil. And it is a complete rift in the world economic hegemony of the United States. It is a major change in the way our world works in a very positive way, because the U.S. should not have hegemony. So it is a very positive moment. And Tucker is trying to set Putin up to say, oh, yeah, you're right. China is just going to take over all these other countries and look at evil China. Now, of course, that's not what Putin says.
Do you worry about that?
Well, we have heard those boogeyman stories before. It is a boogeyman story. We're neighbors with China. You cannot choose neighbors just as you cannot choose close relatives. We share a border of 1,000 kilometers with them. This is number one. Second, we have a centuries-long history of coexistence. We're used to it. Third, China's foreign policy philosophy is not aggressive. Its idea is to always look for compromise, and we can see that.
See, these are some of the things that are horrifying for the U.S. ruling elite to have put in front of Americans. And I'm not saying I agree with everything Putin does or says. There's plenty of his actions that I do not support. But in terms of ideas, like the idea he just said of we should work together with other countries, especially countries we share borders with. And China does not have the aggressive foreign policy that the U.S. has. China is not, I mean, I'm adding this part. China is not bombing and killing children around the world. Like there are many things, that most of which he just said, that some of which I added, that the U.S. ruling elite do not want put in front of the American people. They don't want the American people hearing these things. China needs to be the big bad boogeyman, as the word he uses. China needs to be the big bad boogeyman. And Tucker Carlson is part of that manufacturing of consent for war, be it Cold War or hot war against China. And Tucker Carlson's part of that. So Tucker Carlson was trying to set up that type of answer, and he gets rebuked. Now, luckily, Tucker Carlson is on the right side of the information war, I guess, on Ukraine. I don't know that he's doing it for the right reasons. I do think he probably cares a little bit about white people dying, maybe. He certainly doesn't care about other people dying, it doesn't seem. But anyway, he is against the proxy war in Ukraine. He is against the expansion of NATO, but is largely from a place of wanting America to be stronger and hold on to its empire, as opposed to wanting a more equal world, a world of sustainability, equality, and peace. That is not really what Tucker Carlson's about.
Next point is as follows. We are always told the same boogeyman story, and here it goes again, through an euphemistic form, but it is still the same boogeyman story. The cooperation with China keeps increasing. The pace at which China's cooperation with Europe is growing is higher and greater than that of the growth of Chinese-Russian cooperation. Ask Europeans, aren't they afraid? They might be, I don't know. But they are still trying to access China's market at all costs, especially now that they are facing economic problems. Chinese businesses are also exploring the European market. Do Chinese businesses have small presence in the United States? Yes, the political decisions are such that they are trying to limit their cooperation with China. It is to your own detriment, Mr. Tucker, that you are limiting cooperation with China. You are hurting yourself.
And by yourself, he means the United States limiting cooperation with China. And, nothing Putin said there is outlandish or even controversial. China is a massive economic power, 1.4 billion people. But on top of being a massive economic power, they also are the country that has taken the most people out of extreme poverty over the last 30 years. 850 million people taken out of extreme poverty within China over the past 30 years. And it is, as he said, to the great detriment for these countries not to work together in one regard or another. But the U.S. is trying to shut off Europe and Russia. Their hope was the U.S. hope of the proxy war in Ukraine. And the reason the U.S. ran around for a year trying to get everyone to say, oh, my God, Russia is the worst country to ever live. And Putin's Hitler and he wants to take over all of Europe. Part of the reason of that was to try and economically shut off Russia, to get much of the world to say, oh, my God, they're right. Putin's Hitler. And so therefore, we will not work with them anymore. We will not cooperate economically. And it worked with Europe, right? Europe essentially does not work with Russia economically anymore, or in a lot of ways. They still do in some ways, and of course, it has heavily hurt Europe. Europe is struggling because of it. The U.S. doesn't give a shit. And it did not work with China. Instead, it actually put Russia further into the arms of China and into a partnership. But anyway, I'm getting off topic here. But let me just play before I play another clip from Putin. Let's see. Ben Norton collected some of Tucker's greatest hits on his like anti-China xenophobic garbage. Because you should know who you're dealing with here.
Russia is not America's main enemy, obviously. No sane person thinks it is. Our main enemy, of course, is China. And the United States ought to be in a relationship with Russia aligned against China to the extent that we can.
Now, you have to ask yourself why Tucker Carlson hates China so much more than he hates Russia. And a lot of people think it may come down to skin color. It's kind of like we should be aligned. The white world should be aligned against these goddamn Chinese. I don't know why he despises China so much more than Russia, but
China is the country that's currently, right now, murdering tens of thousands of Americans every year with fentanyl.
Which is such a stretch. It is such an amazing stretch to be like, China's murdering Americans with fentanyl. First of all, people are dying from fentanyl, and it is horrific. And I actually did a segment on it last week about the 107,000 last year died of ODs in the, I think it was the highest year ever. But he's claiming it's China because the base chemical in a lot of what ends up being done in these, black market, mainly drugs that come into the U.S., the base chemicals, many of them come from Chinese labs, apparently, originally. I don't know how much of that is propaganda or how much of that is truth, but for the moment, let's assume it's true. They then go to Mexico mostly, but obviously other places as well, but mostly Mexico, where they're then cooked into the fentanyl and the other similar opioids that then are delivered to the United States and have killed people. To blame China, to blame China at all for the fact that chemicals made in some underground lab in China get to Mexico, which then get to the United States, is hilarious to begin with. But he's not even blaming them like they need to do a better job of finding out where these chemicals come from. He's blaming them as if, Xi Jinping is sitting there being like, we will take out Americans with fentanyl. It's so dumb, but that's all he could find for the harm that, like physical harm that China's doing to your average American. And so he's saying that China is carefully killing Americans with fentanyl. It's just so dumb. You notice he didn't say Mexico is killing Americans with fentanyl, even though it ultimately mainly comes from Mexico and Latin American countries. But no, it's China.
It's depopulating parts of the country. It's pushing our life expectancy down.
And he's also so outraged about this, about fentanyl and how many it's killing, which he should be. But wouldn't step one be, I don't know, to be furious at the U.S. government for the drug war, which has made fentanyl and other drugs completely unregulated and more harmful and, bought in back alleys, as opposed to actually decriminalizing drugs and making them safer so you could be like Portugal, which went from the highest ODs to the lowest number of ODs in all of Europe. Like, shouldn't he be furious about that? Step one, maybe. But of course, he doesn't give a shit about your average Americans in certain regards. It's not like he spends a lot of time talking about homeless. It's not like he spends a lot of time talking about the people that are in prison right now, over 2 million people in our prison industrial complex that were arrested for having some of these drugs. No, that's not his thing. Instead, if it's xenophobic and against China, then it fits. If you were to show concern for Americans in other ways, then it doesn't fit.
That's how profound a threat this is.
Okay, so here's one reason one. Here's another one.
If Russia ever joined forces with China, American global hegemony, its power would end instantly.
And you notice how he's very concerned about that, right? Because he wants, for people who think, for people who are left-wing and want sustainability and equality and peace around the world, and you start to think Tucker is the good guy, here he is saying his goal is to make sure, that U.S. hegemony continues, U.S. empire. Tucker Carlson wants to make sure the U.S. empire is always as powerful as can be. So you just know that. Don't start to think that he's somehow left-wing or something.
You'd have the world's largest landmass and largest natural gas reserves allied with the world's largest population and world's largest economy. So a Russia-China axis would be not just more powerful than the United States, but much more powerful. It would have the scale to control a lot of the world's economy and trade routes and raw materials. It could project military force that, posturing aside, we actually don't have the power to stop.
And there he is, assuming that China wants to exert military force around the world when they have shown no interest in doing that. They spend like a fraction of what the U.S. does in military. The U.S. has 800 to 900 military bases around the world. China has one outside of China. I think they might be working on the second one right now. But the literal, not 100, one. They've won outside of China. China has shown, and they're not bombing anywhere. Whereas Obama's final year, he was bombing, 26,000 bombs were dropped by the U.S. military under Obama. His final year. Trump's first year, 40,000 bombs were dropped. I'm sure the numbers are essentially the same now, but they stopped. The Pentagon, I believe, have stopped giving those numbers out, have stopped reporting on those numbers because they don't want the American people to know just how many people they're murdering every day. All right, let's jump to another part of the interview. Another good part of the interview about the Nord Stream pipeline. And I will give Tucker Carlson credit for asking this question.
Who blew up Nord Stream?
You for sure.
I was busy that day. Nate, do you have I did not blow up Nord Stream. Thank you, though.
У вас лично, может быть, есть алиби, у вас лично.
You personally may have an alibi, but the CIA has no such alibi.
Do you have evidence that NATO or the CIA did it?
Знаете,
You know, I won't get into details, but people always say in such cases, look for someone who is interested. But in this case, we should not only look for someone who is interested, but also for someone who has capabilities.
Now, for one thing, saying, do you have evidence? It's like, well, he could have classified evidence that he's not allowed to give. I mean, for one thing, if Russia is spying in the Baltic Sea underneath, next to Norway, they probably don't want to reveal that, maybe, or at least they don't want to reveal how they would know such things. So there's a reason he might not want to say whether they have exact proof. But even if they didn't have, let's say Russia didn't have the smoking gun of, who blew up Nord Stream, as Putin's saying, you look at who wanted to do it and who had the ability. And he talks about the ability to go down to the bottom of the Baltic Sea and blow up the pipeline. But it was actually 3 explosions. They blew up 3 out of 4 pipelines at the bottom of the Baltic Sea in a rather complicated, and these are not just pipelines. When you put something at the bottom of a sea, you don't just lay down a pipe. These are pipelines with, feet and feet of cement around them. It would have to be a very impressive kind of explosive to take out these pipelines. And so he says, who has that kind of capability along with the desire to take out those pipelines? Well, it's clearly the United States. Now, whether they handed that ability, you know, the explosives and the technology that was needed over to Ukraine or Denmark or something. Was it Denmark or was it Norway? I can't even remember. But anyway, it doesn't really matter, and it's a fair point that, and it's one of the reasons that most of us know it was the United States. Is the United States had talked about blowing up these pipelines. They didn't use the term blowing up. Had talked about stopping these pipelines. Biden had said in an interview, "We will stop those pipelines." And when pressed on that, when one of the interviewers said, "How are you going to stop the pipelines? It's a deal between Germany and Russia." Biden gave a little smirk and said, "We have ways," basically saying we would blow it up. I mean, what? Like, he basically admitted it on live television. What more do you need as to who blew up the pipelines?
Because there may be many people interested, but not all of them are capable of sinking to the bottom of the Baltic Sea and carrying out this explosion. These two components should be connected. Who is interested and who is capable of doing it?
But I'm confused. I mean, that's the biggest act of industrial terrorism ever, and it's the largest emission of CO2 in history. Okay, so if you had...
I think it was actually methane, which is far more dangerous than CO2. But it's interesting Tucker Carlson cares about CO2 or methane emissions, considering I don't know why he would care, considering I don't even think he believes climate change is real. So, you know, if he wants to live in that false world of climate change isn't real, then why would he care about emissions? Anyway.
Had evidence, and presumably given your security services, your intel services, you would, that NATO, the US, CIA, the West did this. Why wouldn't you present it and win a propaganda victory?
In the war of propaganda, it is very difficult to defeat the United States because the United States controls all the world's media and many European media.
Yeah, another good point is that the US has a propaganda system that is so massive that anything Russia does is going to be, you know, the descriptions of it are going to be dictated on the world stage by the United States and Western propaganda, which we've seen again and again. But it is interesting that despite the massive propaganda abilities of the United States, it's failing because it is so egregious what the U.S. is doing, such as blowing up the Nord Stream pipelines, that the world is finding out anyway, even though Russia does not have anything near the propaganda abilities in terms of number of eyeballs that the U.S. does. Even despite that, the world is largely figuring out the truth also about the genocide Israel's perpetrating. The truth is getting out there, and the U.S. can't stop it. And that is an impressive change in our reality. And to speak to that, 80% of the world lives, the world population, 80% live in countries that have not signed on to the U.S. proxy war in Ukraine. They've not said that, it doesn't mean they've necessarily sided with Russia. Many of them have just said, we're not going to be a part of it. But the U.S. has heavily pressured just about every country around the world to sign on to sanctions against Russia, saying this is all Russia's fault. There's no history behind it. The U.S. didn't do anything. Just get Russia. And 80% of the world's population is in countries that have not signed on to this proxy war, which again is a big deal. All right. So again, you know, the reason I'm not showing more clips of that interview is because a lot of it is stuff that I think you probably know already. It's, you know, like I said, a half hour of it was history of Ukraine and the U.S. setting up the proxy war, the Maidan coup, etc. So there was some interesting moments, but less than you might think out of 2 hours. Anyway, compare. I just want you to do this real quick. Compare. You don't have to agree with everything Putin's saying, but just compare the way he's able to speak and the history he's able to give. He spent a half hour, like I said, giving the history of Ukraine going back hundreds and hundreds of years. Compare that with what we're getting from the U.S. president. Whether you agree or disagree with any of it, doesn't matter. Compare that to just what you're getting. Here's Biden the other day, yesterday, I believe.
The conduct of the response in Gaza, in the Gaza Strip, has been over the top. I think that, as you know, initially, the president of Mexico, Sisi, did not want to open up the gate to allow humanitarian material to get in.
Did you catch that? The president of Mexico, Sisi, didn't want to open up the gate to Gaza. Do these sound like different parts of the world to you? Just a little bit?
I talked to him. I convinced him to open the gate.
Biden talked to the president of Mexico to convince him to open the Gaza gates.
I talked to Bibi to open the gate on the Israeli side. I've been pushing really hard to get humanitarian assistance into Gaza.
So, so not only does he confuse the president of Egypt with the president of Mexico, and not only does he appear to think the president of Mexico controls the gate to Gaza as opposed to Egypt, but also, even if he had said the correct, with all of that going on, as a genocide being perpetrated, he's saying he got the gate to open for a couple of trucks to go through. A little bit of humanitarian aid, a little bit of food got through. Like, that is less than the least you could do. That is fucking nothing. Nothing when a genocide is going down. When thousands are dying every week. We're talking 28,000 people, 100,000 either dead, wounded, or missing. Chances are 28,000 dead. So 28,000 is low. 70% women and children. And you are alive. It's meaningless. Meaningless. Because the U.S. is not actually trying to stop this genocide. The U.S. is letting Israel and facilitating Israel's genocide on the people of Gaza. And now, why not show you a short clip of Nancy Pelosi nearly punching Medea Benjamin in the face for calling her an Israel apologist. Nancy Pelosi, who has endorsed this genocide at every turn, voted for it at every turn. Medea Benjamin, a friend of the show, been on several times, co-founder of Code Pink. She is in the halls of Congress, and she calls Nancy Pelosi an Israel apologist. And as you'll see, Nancy Pelosi just about punches her in the face.
You are one Israel apologist. You are one Israel apologist. Yes, right here.
Look, you see the fist start to come up? She makes a fist and starts to raise it forward, and then probably thinks that might be bad for her political career. But... I mean, it is like she didn't even call her. She could have called her a genocidal maniac. She could have called her a murderer. She could have called her a child murderer. And instead, Israel, pretty nice way to put it. And yet that was enough to get Nancy Pelosi to nearly punch Medea Benjamin in the face. Okay, I want to get to, before we bring on Wayne Shung, I want to get to the role of think tanks in the endless war that the U.S. has been perpetrating for years and years. Think tanks are a huge part of this, and very little attention is given to them. Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention, by the way, that please, everybody, hit thumbs up. Obviously, it's free and it helps. hit subscribe, hit follow. If you're not following on both YouTube and Rumble, I hope you do that. The full live streams are on rumble.com/LeeCamp. Hit the follow button and then hit the bell icon. On YouTube, you have to hit subscribe and then the bell, and you have to hit the all next to the bell, because otherwise they'll not send you alerts of when my videos are going out. Also, I've just been putting up several videos of me tearing apart the lies of various well-known figures. So far, I've done Bill Maher, Ben Shapiro, Rachel Maddow, and AOC. And that is all on my Rumble, as well as youtube.com/@RealLeeCamp. So hope you will click follow and help this show not be quite so suppressed. That would be awesome. Okay, so on to the think tanks. Oh, in a minute, this live stream will only be at rumble.com/LeeCamp, as well as my locals page. So if you would like to keep following the live stream, it's free to watch on Rumble. Head over to rumble.com/LeeCamp. It's from Covert Action Magazine. It's a pretty good investigative piece. Fake intellectuals working for think tanks funded by the arms industry are driving support for war after war after war. And as we know, Joe Biden is not the one really running this country. It's really people like Anthony Blinken and the Joint Chiefs of Staff and people like that. And where are they getting their ideas? I mean, yes, some of them may just pop up in their head in the middle of the night. Hey, let's support genocide in Israel. But some of them come from these think tanks, because not only do these think tanks spend a lot of time, playing the chess game of geopolitics, how can we destroy other countries, but they also spend a lot of time finding out how to correctly propagandize it, how to, if the ruling elite in the halls of power are going off something that was brought forward by one of these think tanks, they know that they have the endorsement of a certain section of the ruling elite as well. And so there's many reasons that these think tanks are incredibly powerful as they're funded by the arms industry and big banks, etc. A few days after October 7th attacks in northern Israel, the Atlantic Council ran an inflammatory article on its website by Jonathan Panikoff, a former deputy national intelligence officer, entitled, "It Doesn't Matter Whether Iran Planned the Hamas Attack, Tehran is Still to Blame." Basically, it doesn't matter whether Iran was involved, we should still bomb them. The article went on to support an aggressive military response by the U.S. and Israel that could potentially entail bombing Iran. The Atlantic Council has been particularly hawkish with regards to Russia, helping to fuel the proxy war between the U.S. and Russia and Ukraine that has decimated a generation of Ukrainian Russian youth and left us on the threshold of World War III. There's a book that emphasizes the undue influences of think tank pseudo-intellectuals because of their ubiquitous presence in the mainstream media as well as academia. They also run these social media platforms in some ways. Facebook famously basically gave their fact-checking abilities or dictates over to the Atlantic Council to decide what information should be allowed on Facebook. I'll give you a hint. I'm not doing so well on Facebook. They don't actually want you to see anything I say. Their job, meaning the think tanks, is to manufacture consent for the goals of their paymasters, weapons manufacturers and oil companies who profit off of war, along with foreign governments courting more U.S. military aid. Think tanks have become a symptom of hyper-capitalism, in which all aspects of society have become an appendage to the markets. And I'm glad they get capitalism in here, because that is the source of it all, right? It's not just to facilitate war and U.S. hegemony, but the reason for U.S. hegemony is mainly money at the end of the day. It's to make sure that the U.S. petrodollar and those who are enriched by it keep their immense wealth, and that wealth keeps growing. To continue from the article, even political influence is regulated by the free market, in which think tanks are an important component. The think tanks help condition the public to fear foreign threats, which is exactly what Tucker Carlson was doing about China right there. To fear foreign threats and support wars of aggression under the veneer of providing independent expert analysis. Paul Craig Roberts, the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for Economic Policy under Reagan, has called the Atlantic Council the marketing arm of the military security complex. Yeah, security. That's what it gives us, right? Putting us on the brink of World War III. It makes us secure. The Atlantic Council's financial report from 2020 reveals that it received over $1 million from the United Arab Emirates. So even the UAE is helping decide who we should be at war with. It also received major contributions from the British Foreign and Commonwealth Office, Facebook, Goldman Sachs, Rockefeller Foundation, the NED, which of course is a CIA cutout, U.S. State Department, a Saudi oil billionaire that's good to hear. He's also helping decide our foreign policy. Ukrainian oligarch Viktor Pinchuk, Crescent Petroleum, and Burisma, the energy company owned by Ukrainian oligarchs, which appointed Hunter Biden to its board, with former CIA counterterrorism director Cofer Black. The Atlantic Council's close ties to the CIA were further evident when its former executive vice president, Damon Wilson, was appointed CEO of NED, a CIA offshoot that promotes propaganda and supports dissidents in countries that we're trying to flip or bring down. Former CIA Director Woolsey is listed as a lifetime director of the Atlantic Council. Former CIA Directors Leon Panetta, Robert Gates, and David Petraeus are listed on the board, along with such war criminals as Henry Kissinger and Condoleezza Rice. And again, I can't stress enough, these think tanks that are all the things I just described are setting the policy for U.S. government. It's not the American people. The American people don't at all set the policy. In fact, I just played a clip yesterday of the spokesperson for the National Security Council, Kirby, being asked whether the American people get to weigh in on the U.S. support of the genocide in Gaza, and he was just indignant. No, Biden doesn't check what the American people want when he's making decisions, but he damn well checks what the Atlantic Council wants. Tell you that much. Oh, yeah, I like this part of the article because it does a little bit apply to me. One of the Atlantic Council's fellows, Michael Weiss, spreads his anti-Russia invective as an editor at the Popular, and it's also anti-Russia lies. I mean, they publish straight up lies. Anti-Russia invective as editor of the popular online media outlet, The Daily Beast. The Daily Beast has also come after me multiple times. He helps run a neo-McCarthyite website, Proper Not, which Proper Not also went after a lot of the outlets that I've written for, a lot of the outlets you probably respect as the best outlets on the internet. Proper Not had claimed were all Russian propaganda. Proper Not that promotes the worst kind of fear-mongering imaginable, attacking independent media outlets, including the Ron Paul Institute, for allegedly advancing Russian propaganda. So the editor of the Daily Beast, which did a whole article on me and a few other people and how we were Russian propaganda and how you should make sure. And they were trying, I think the main reason is they were trying to cut down all of our Patreon accounts so that we could not earn a living, because you want to destroy, when anyone's revealing the crimes of the empire, you want to destroy their, ability to have a career. In 2015, the Atlantic Council helped prepare a proposal for arming the Ukrainian military, sounding familiar, with offensive weaponry like Javelin anti-tank missiles, the same year that it presented its award. Javelin missile. Circle jerk of where the things are funded, also made media line manufacturer can for the and it's all connected, and people leave think tanks out of their condemnation of this horror show that we create around the world. They often ignore the think tank aspect of it. Last February, Matthew Kroenig, the deputy director of the Atlantic Council's Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security, argued for consideration of the U.S. preemptive use of tactical, quote unquote, nuclear weapons. So Atlantic Council is arguing for, just use little nuclear weapons. The article says this would not only kill thousands of people directly, but likely cause what scientists characterize as a nuclear winter by injecting so much smoke and debris into the air that it would block sunlight and, of course, damage the food sources around the world. The Atlantic Council continues today, along with other think tanks, to whitewash Ukrainian war crimes, corruption, and close ties with the far right and neo-Nazis. Michael McFaul of the Hoover Institute even celebrates Ukrainian President Zelensky's crackdown on opposition politicians and media. Zelensky has banned the opposition party. He's also banned any media people that, journalists. Agencies. NATO, the arming of Ukraine in order to draw Russia into a conflict that would facilitate its overextension militarily and economically and cause the Russian government to lose domestic and international support. So the Rand Corporation did exactly, they called for and they put out the studies for exactly what ended up happening. Basically, the ruling elite looked to these think tanks as the game plan for their foreign policy actions. And this article, if you want to get more, and then they get into the Center for a New American Century, which is another major one and includes Victoria Nuland, who was one of the crafters of the proxy war in Ukraine. Anyway, a lot of great detail there. It's at Covert Action Magazine if you want to read it over there. And I just wanted to bring to you some of the truth about think tanks. Okay, we're headed over to rumble.com/LeeCamp, free to watch there as well as on my locals page. And I'm about to bring on our special guest. I'm very excited for that. Just give me 1 second here. So yeah, I've been reading and watching videos about the persecution of, but also the efforts of Wayne Hsiung for a while now, and he does great work. And if I'm remembering correctly, I think I might have interviewed him once at Redacted Tonight. But anyway, co-founder of Direct Action Everywhere, and one of the most hardworking activists you will find out there. Please welcome Wayne Hsiung.
Hey, Lee, how's it going? Excited to be here.
Hey.
And yeah, you've interviewed me once before.
Yeah, I thought so. Hey, Wayne, it is good to have you back. I'm glad you're free. That is a good thing.
Free. It wasn't fun sitting in jail, but
no, and I want to get into that as well. But some people that regularly watch my shows definitely know you well. Others may have no idea. So I first want to start off by explaining, what you do with Direct Action Everywhere and what the action was or actions that.
January 2015, a law went into a proposition that was we found the law went into effect is that we're still. I've been investigating farms and slaughterhouses for most of the last 20 years of my life. I've been a lawyer, law professor, tried every single legal means available to us to try and create some accountability in the system.
And just because I want to bring everybody along, those who are kind of not in the know, I often refer to factory farms as torture farms. These are facilities with thousands and thousands of animals that basically never see light of day. They're on top of each other. They can barely turn around. Most people who actually go into one come out, vomiting at what they've seen. And these are even meat eaters who think it's fine, walk in and are so revolted they can't stay in there.
Yeah, and not just what you see, what you smell, what you feel, because there's this thick film that gets on your eyes and your hair and your glasses when you're in a facility that has not just thousands. In the case of Sunrise Farms, one of the egg farms that we saw animals in cages in, it's hundreds of thousands of animals in a single building where they never go outside, they never see the sunlight, and when they're pooping and they're dying and they're cannibalizing each other by the thousand inside a single building. So we reported this to authorities, and I'm an attorney myself. We even worked with former prosecutors who, bust criminal syndicates all the time, who verified our findings and said there are all these violations of law, and the government did nothing about it. So in May 2018, I organized a large peaceful demonstration, people holding flowers and peace signs. We went to the factory farm that supplies the Whole Foods, described itself as certified humane, but we knew was confining animals in illegal ways. And we just tried to give a few of the animals some help. That's all we did. We called the authorities. We did this in broad daylight. We had a legal opinion from one of the most distinguished criminal law scholars in the state of California saying we had the right to do what we did. We had the right to rescue animals when the government had been asleep at the wheel. But instead of charging the company, the government went after us. And I faced, I think, initially 7 felonies, got dropped down to 1 felony by the time I went to trial in September of 2023, and then was convicted of a felony after the judge excluded all evidence of animal cruelty and just got out of jail a few weeks ago, just in time for this show.
What is the claim? What is the felony called, for releasing a dying, harmed animal?
Yeah, so initially they charged us with burglary and theft. And then they realized these animals are so sick, they have no commercial value. We actually basically did a favor to the business in a sense, because these companies are supposed to actually remove the sick animals because they're a danger not just to the other animals at the farm, they're a danger to the public. There have been numerous salmonella recalls in the state of California, around the country. I think the CDC estimates it's over 150,000 Americans get sick from salmonella every year. So you probably heard about salmonella outbreaks in your local community. Yeah. Often comes from egg farms and poultry farms. So these chickens should have been removed. So when the government initially charged us with theft and burglary, we said, look, we were doing the company's job, and these chickens should not have been raised for commercial purposes. And so the government ultimately had to drop the theft charges because we didn't steal anything of value. We took sick animals to the vet. So the felony they ultimately charged me with was conspiracy to trespass. They said I conspired with hundreds of other people to trespass on a company's property and commit a crime. Now, I've talked to dozens of criminal attorneys in the state of California. Not a single one of them has ever heard of conspiracy to trespass, because trespass is a relatively trivial crime. It's a misdemeanor. Right. You normally get a fine, you go on your way. But in this case, because it was a big, powerful agricultural corporation that we supposedly trespassed on the property of, the government brought a felony conspiracy charge, went hard after us for many, many years. The charges were initially brought in 2018. They went 5 years after us, persecuting us relentlessly. And then partly because the judge in the case refused to allow any evidence as to why we were trespassing, why were we there in the first place, I ended up in jail on a 90-day sentence in late 2023.
Yeah, talk more about the what happened in court. And I know you've written about it on your blog, which everyone should check out as well, if you can give that website. But about how it worked in the court and how you weren't allowed to give evidence and witnesses. And
yeah, so our primary defense of this conspiracy, a business, because the industry, the abuses and the law unfolding, which is First Amendment. You can, and we did. We did call the authorities before our demonstration, as we had done on numerous occasions. The only difference this time was instead of just waiting and waiting and waiting for the authorities to ignore us, we took direct action. We decided we needed to help these animals ourselves. Now, all that context is really important. You can't really, as a juror, decide whether this guy's guilty of the crime if you don't understand that we've called the authorities repeatedly, that there are animals that are cannibalizing each other. And again, this is uncontroverted. The owner of the company himself has admitted there are animals eating each other alive inside this farm because it's so congested, because it's so filthy, and because the animals are literally going insane inside. The judge repeatedly denied us the opportunity to show photos, to show videos, to even testify about the efforts we made to contact the authorities, the extensive animal cruelty that we saw at the farm for years prior to this demonstration. As a result, you got a bunch of jurors who hear these crazy vegans just ran onto this factory farm and were running amok, causing chaos. and they refuse to leave, right? And so I can almost understand why a juror in that situation would convict someone of a crime. And the good thing for us is it also gives us extremely strong grounds for appeal, because one of the central issues we're going to be appealing on, and one of the central grounds upon which the judge denied us the right to offer any evidence of animal cruelty, is the question of whether animals are persons, legal persons, in other words, living beings that have some legal standing, or whether they're property, whether they're things that a corporation, for example, can just abuse, can literally throw into a landfill alive, and it has no legal consequences at all. The judge concluded the latter. The judge decided that, there was one point in the trial, for example, the judge said, well, if we're going to start protecting animals, what's next? Do we have to protect bacteria and cellular matter too? And that's preposterous. Any second grade child understands there's a biological difference between a sentient animal, a pig, a dog, a cat, and a paramecium.
It reminds me of the idiotic arguments against gay marriage, where people would say, if a man marries a man, they're going to marry a goat next.
Exactly. Or like marry a chair. I mean, there's a difference. There's a difference between a man marrying a chair and a man marrying a goat and a man marrying a human being. But in this courtroom, that common sense difference that any second grader understands between a chicken and a paramecium, a pig and a dented can, that distinction was not made in court. And as a result, we were denied the opportunity to talk about the animals we were trying to protect.
Are you, because I'm often surprised that there are millions and millions of environmentalists across the country that care a lot for the environment and realize that our environment is collapsing around us. And it just seems like so rarely do they ever make the connection between that and factory farming, which is one of the most environmentally destructive practices on Earth, and is causing, it uses insane amounts of fresh water. It's causing ocean dead zones, deforestation, like the list goes on. And yet environmentalists seem to not want to delve into that area.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. So agriculture, for example, uses about 80% of the water from the most important drinking water reservoir in the entire country. It's the Colorado River Basin that comes into California, Nevada, California, Arizona. We all get water from this one water basin. 80% of that does not go to us. It goes to animals who we then eat, right? And it goes to feeding the profits. And oftentimes that's subsidized. While the average consumer is having their water rates jacked up because of things like drought and climate change, the factory farms literally get subsidies. Our taxpayer dollars go to paying for their water. And I think there are a lot of complicated reasons why environmentalism has not kind of joined with the animal rights movement in fighting factory farm. But the biggest one is just cognitive dissonance avoidance. Most people eat meat and they don't like to see themselves as part of the problem. And for me, the solution is to point out, and this is controversial within the vegan movement. I know you're vegan, I'm vegan, I believe in veganism. I don't want the vegans coming after me for saying this, but I think we're too focused on veganism and consumer change. And we have to allow people, I'm not saying we shouldn't advocate for veganism, we should. We have to understand, just as there are going to be a lot of environmentalists who drive SUVs, and we should still welcome them to the fold, there are going to be a lot of people who could potentially support animal rights and the fight against factory farms who might still be eating animals. And we have to include them in the fold. That's super controversial, but I think it's just one of the basic 101 lessons of grassroots organizing. Don't turn people away at the door because they're not perfect yet.
Yeah, it's not controversial with me. I absolutely agree that if you're going to create change, you need to, I don't know what the percentage is, 90-something% of Americans probably, you need to reach out to them and say, look, even if you're not going to stop eating all the meat, there are many things that you can do, many steps you can take, decrease your consumption, etc. But rather than just saying, oh, you don't matter because you're not as pure. In terms of your prison time and everything, what do you hope to achieve? Obviously you want to save those animals that you were saving, but I imagine your aims are larger than that. Are you hoping this gets the message out to more people, etc.?
I think one of the most important thing activists need to demonstrate to the world is credibility. And one of the most important ways to get credibility is to put some skin in the game yourself. Because it's easy to say, like, yes, you know, you all have to do X, Y, Z. You have to do what I tell you and change the world. And, you know, there's almost a cliche now where people on the left and the right, it used to be mostly right wingers, but I feel like even left wingers nowadays are getting tired of activists just screaming at them and telling them what to do. And what we try to do is almost the opposite. Instead of imposing cost on ordinary people and the people we're trying to change, we invite costs upon ourselves. And there's a literature and social movements about this. It's called the power of sacrifice. That there's something really powerful about people are willing to sacrifice for a cause. So when I've been charged in these cases, you know, I can't say it's pleasant. It's tough to face persecution by the FBI. You know, I've been sued. I've been relentlessly charged with crimes in states across the nation over the last 10 years. But the flip side of that is when people see that there are dozens of FBI agents tasked with trying to prosecute me for taking 2 sick baby pigs to the vet, when they see that the state of California, a progressive state, a democratic state, has likely used millions of dollars to prosecute me and other animal rights activists for holding flowers and peace signs outside of factory farms, a lot of people otherwise might have cognitive dissonance avoidance and say, you know, I don't want to look at this. This is too disgusting. I want to make myself feel bad for eating animals or eggs or dairy or whatever it is. Start looking and paying attention because they say like, wow, what are our taxpayer dollars going for? Wow. Why are these people going to jail for holding peace signs and flowers outside of a factory farm? And so it's part of the formula for change that you've got to put some skin in the game yourself. The other thing that's really important, though, about specifically legal sacrifice is when you get into the courtroom, it's an opportunity to make arguments that otherwise you can't make for animals. If a pig tries to sue a factory farmer for abusing her, for keeping her confined in a cage illegally, the court's just going to throw that out and say, you don't have any standing. You're a pig. You're in completely invisible law. And for the record, this was the case for people of color and for women for a long time, that women could not bring suits in law. Immigrants like me, you know, I had no standing before the Chinese Exclusion Act was repealed in 1965. A lot of Chinese people didn't have legal standing. We were invisible to law. And one of the things about these court cases is we're trying to leverage our own standing, because whatever you think about the pig or the chicken or the dog, no one doubts that I, as a human being, have some standing in court. And these court cases give us an opportunity to leverage our own legal standing to try and create legal standing for animals. And the real kind of holy grail is if we can establish the notion that not just in a criminal case where a person is being prosecuted for rescuing an animal, but in the law more generally, animals are legal persons and not just property, that there's a difference between a chicken and a chair, there's a difference between a pig and a dented can, then suddenly there's a whole universe of rights that animals must be given because we've established that they are legal persons. So that's the holy grail. That's why I'm willing to risk, 16 years in prison, which I'm going to trial in a month, where I could face 16 years. Because if we achieve that, it's not just the 3 dogs we rescued from Belligerent Farms or the 2 pigs we rescued from Smithfield Foods that we save. It's the billions upon billions of animals who are tortured and caged and abused in unfathomable ways, in ways that your audience would not even believe. That is a holy grail, and that's what we plan to achieve.
Yeah, well put. And I guess in terms of, like you said, people that may not agree with your cause at all may look at, like, why are we spending so much money going after this guy? Why is the state so furious about it? I think something that has a similar impact is what they've done to you in terms of, like, restricting who you can contact and who you can be near and things like that. Talk a little about all these other weird restrictions, electronic monitoring, like.
Yeah. So among other things, animal rights activists, including me, have had to wear ankle monitors constantly. I've had my phone hacked into by the FBI. They surveilled me and tracked my movements in, step-to-step way. Like they literally can see where I'm moving as long as I'm carrying my phone. And the most recent thing is the court in Sonoma County, after we organized this peaceful demonstration, there were little kids there, their grandmothers. It was completely peaceful. The only people who engaged in any even arguable violence was the farm itself that attacked our activists, which, again, was not addressed at all. No one cared that we were assaulted. But as a result of this large demonstration we did, I've been ordered to have no contact with 14 of my closest friends for the next 2 years. And I'm working with an appellate lawyer on appealing this case, and he's seen, probably dozens and dozens of criminal cases. murders, gang cases where people have engaged in very serious violent crimes. And he said he's never heard of something like this because we have a First Amendment. And in theory, freedom of association is not just in the Bill of Rights, it's the first in the Bill of Rights. Along with freedom of speech, freedom of association was a thing our founding fathers said, we don't like the government telling us we're not allowed to gather as Puritans or pilgrims and worship the way we like to worship. We don't like the fact that we're not allowed to gather because we have a political critique of the current system. Because speech only matters if you can actually talk to other people who care about the same things you care about. And I've been barred from talking to or even coming within 100 yards of 14 of the people who are closest to me in life. And this criminal appellate attorney that I've been working with said he's never heard of something like this unfolding in a case. This will be his first. And it's a case involving an activist who organized some grandmothers and little kids to take sick chickens to the vet. That tells you a lot about the priorities of the U.S. government right now.
Tells you a lot about the power, too, of these corporations that run these farms, that they have that much power over the state that they can, put pressure on them to bring these charges and continue persecuting you for years at a time. Well, I think we're going to wrap up, but is there anything I missed? And make sure you tell people where they can keep reading and learning about your various activities.
Yeah, so I'll just say two things. One is our next trial is coming out on March 18th. It involves 3 beagles, including a blind beagle puppy who was psychotic from the torment she endured inside of a lab. It's in Dane County, Wisconsin. It's on March 18th. It's 2 felony charges, up to 16 years in prison. You could just go to righttorescue.com and follow that case. And, the support really makes a huge difference because, again, what matters in these cases isn't just what happens in the courtroom, but what happens in the court of public opinion, what happens on the streets. And second, the way to follow me specifically is my new organization, The Simple Heart, has a newsletter called The Simple Heart Newsletter. It's on Substack.
The Simple Heart.
The Simple Heart, yeah. And you can just go to simpleheart.org and follow kind of our updates on the trial and the other work we're doing. So, and yeah, just really appreciate the opportunity, Lee. You've done more work than anyone I know, honestly, in showing the public how much corporate control of everything, including the media, has distorted our views and our behaviors and hurt us, not just other living beings, but us. So just really appreciate the opportunity to share our story.
Thank you. That means a lot. Keep up the fight. And I certainly hope you don't end up in prison anytime soon.
Thanks, Lee.
Thanks, Wayne. All right, there it is. Hope you enjoyed that interview. Epic activist who is continuing the fight every day. Okay, folks, I will see you Monday. I do these live streams 4 days a week, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific. You generally will not get an alert that my live stream is happening, so please just show up, 3 p.m. Eastern, 4 days a week. Also, if you feel like you got 38 cents from this episode, or you want my book, Dangerous Ideas, or you want to get these live streams whenever you want, or you want the exclusive segments, all of that when you become a member at leecamp.net, or if you're watching on Rumble, just click the red Join Lee tab and it will take you there. And when you get to that page, the first one that says become a member is the free version where you can become a member of the community but not get the perks. And then you scroll down, become a subscriber is where you actually support the show and get all of that free stuff. Also, I often do extra segments. I did one just yesterday for the folks at Locals in that community there. You also can post your own stuff. So, and by the way, everybody watching at Locals, the stuff you've been posting is excellent. Sometimes I'm able to use it in the show. Sometimes I just mention it, but thank you for making that community so awesome and posting important articles over there. Anyway, everybody, you rock, and I will see you Monday, 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific, and keep fighting.